Hello and welcome to episode 76 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm Dalton.
Welcome back, chaps. So today we're going to revisit our conversation about GNOME. Now, to us, we're revisiting this, but to you, dear listener, this will be the first time we're talking about it. Bit of context. About a year or so, maybe a bit more than that ago, we recorded an episode about our thoughts on GNOME, but then we got to the end of it and, I said, see you later. And then we stopped recording and we all just said to each other, we can't put that out. It was far too negative. And we all just agreed, right, let's just delete our recording. And then I can't even remember what we just came up with something random to talk about like we normally do instead. However, things have changed. My opinions on GNOME have changed. And I have been pretty vocal on various other shows in the past, but now I'm broadly positive about GNOME. And Gary, you have been using GNOME quite extensively over the last sort of 6 months, right?
Yeah, I use it every day now. So I switched to Ubuntu on my work machine as my primary workstation, which is just stock Ubuntu 22.04. And I say recently, it was probably about 6 months ago, you're right, got a ThinkPad Z13 and couldn't get anything running particularly well on it other than Fedora. So I've been running stock GNOME on Fedora for about the last 6 months.
And that suggests that you've been relatively happy with it then?
Yeah, mostly. I've kind of just got on with it. There's a couple of extensions that I install, which I guess we'll get into a little bit later. But mostly I use it to launch applications and manage Windows, and it just works.
Now, for me, it's because of my M1 MacBook Air and Asahi Linux, which only supports Wayland, which means that my beloved XFCE just does not work, which is not ideal. So my choice is between Plasma and GNOME. Now, the obvious choice for an XFCE user is to just customize Plasma to be like XFCE, but I just haven't done that. I installed Fedora Asahi because that's like the default now, and it came with GNOME, and it's just fine. It's not what I would prefer, but as Gary said, like I launched my stuff, my windows are there. It's fine.
I was quite down in the lost recording, should we call it? And I've definitely softened on it. So when we decided to revisit it, I did what I always try to do, which is actually properly road test it. So I've tried to use the machine that it's installed on every single day for general computing stuff. Anything that's not, I'd be worried because something's unfamiliar, like my accounts, my personal accounts and things. But otherwise, day-to-day computing, where I reach for a computer from the stack of laptops, I've picked the GNOME one every single day. And I've kept Ubuntu 24.04, and then I've also got Silverblue and Bluefin DX, so I can see various perspectives on it. I feel like GNOME 46, which is what is on all of those, is snappier, smoother, and uses less resources. I'm using the same laptop I used when we recorded the last episode, and it feels cleaner, svelter, and less annoying. I don't know whether it's because I've calmed down and I was in a bad way when we recorded that episode, but I don't know what anyone else thinks. That's what I feel. It feels cleaner, smoother, and snappier.
It feels mature at this point. When GNOME Shell first came out, GNOME 3, and it was this huge difference, and Mate fucked off, and Ubuntu didn't know what to do, so created Unity. It wasn't very good back then. But that was a long time ago. They have been doing these releases, incrementally improving to the point now where it is a mature desktop environment and mature computing experience. So therefore, they should throw it all out and start again and do GNOME 5. Make it just completely different.
I do think you have to approach it in a certain way. And I was thinking about this earlier today. When I boot up a Chromebook, I don't approach it thinking, this is all right, but I want to change it, because there's no possibility of that. Yes, you can move the dock around where you want, but you take it as is. But because there is no possibility of a different desktop environment fundamentally, you accept it. And if you bring that mindset to GNOME, it's really tightly put together. It's consistent. I think where the frustration comes in is that I, like you, Joe, am an XFCE user, and I've landed there because Plasma's just too much for me. Yes, I know defaults are king, but it's a spiraling web. It's like a BlackBerry interface for the settings. There's too many settings. I can't deal with it. GNOME is too tight for me and XFCE lands in the middle. And I think that's where I get frustrated because I know I can change the desktop environment. I know there's other stuff available and I get itchy feet.
Yeah, whereas you just can't do that with GNOME. I mean, yeah, you can add extensions and stuff, but ultimately you get what you're given and you just get on with it.
I feel like they've taken some paper cuts out, and I need to ask Gary though, because I was looking over my notes for when I got a bit more annoyed about this. Is there now a minimize button by default?
I don't think so.
Don't think so.
No.
No.
Right, so maybe that's just because there is in UBlue, because yeah, that's still the minimize, maximize, and close buttons are fundamentally how I use a computer, and I don't want to do Super H or start doing gestures. It's just not how I work. So that's frustrating. But I think in Ubuntu and in Bluefin, they put them back in on a default install.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the Ubuntu version of GNOME is better, in my opinion, than stock.
There's no dispute that, in my opinion, this is better.
Yeah. Well, my opinion's always right, and therefore this is objectively truth.
But Gary, you've mentioned before, one of the things you really like is that you sit at your computer sometimes a bit like Minority Report. You have a keyboard in the middle, you have a touchpad on the left, and you have a trackball on the right. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I've got the plethora of strange peripherals on my desk.
But do you have a dial?
I don't have a dial.
Ugh.
I don't have a dial, and I don't have a Stream Deck or any of that stuff. I use a trackball because RSI, and I use the touchpad because I quite like the gestures.
So talk about that a bit more, because it's just not how I think. Like, a touchpad is just a mouse substitute. The maximum gestures I use are a 2-finger tap for the right-click menu. And then most of my laptops, I actively seek separate physical buttons because I hate laptops that just have a touchpad and that's it.
No, you're doing it wrong. You want 2 fingers for middle click and 3 fingers for right click.
No, you're wrong. You
No,
want.
you're wrong.
Well, apparently I am wrong because nobody sets it up that way. And apparently it's very easy to do in Plasma. So before people get writing in with that, yeah, I know. But yeah, what gestures do you use then, Gary? Do you use like all swipe in and stuff like that?
Yeah, I do, yeah. So I use the 3-finger swipe up to show all of the open windows. And I'm certainly not sitting here trying to do it right now to remember what they are because they're just in my muscle memory. I use the 3 fingers to swipe left and right to move between workspaces. I think they might be the only ones I use regularly.
That's about all there is. It used to be that it was like a 3 or 4 finger pinch to get to the workspace overview, and that was awful. I'm glad they fixed that.
Yeah, I just don't think of workspace switching except Control Alt right and left. I would never think to use my mouse to do that.
I would never think to use the keyboard.
Yeah, no, if I'm on a laptop and my hands are on the keyboard, then I'll use the keyboard shortcut. But if my hands are already on the trackpad, I'm going to use the trackpad because otherwise you have to move your hand off the trackpad, and I already have RSI.
I think what changed this for me in terms of using gestures was only using computers that have glass touchpads, like the Z13 does and the MacBook does. I think that's maybe what made me feel like these were more of a normal thing to do. I don't know.
Yeah, you can't do the old finger and thumb technique like I always used to do on my laptop. Thumb just resting on the physical buttons and then finger 1, 2, and 3 fingers to do the various clicks.
You know, I used to play Minecraft like that.
All right.
Fingers on W, A, D, and Shift, thumb on my trackpad buttons, and my right hand on the trackpad. It was awful, terrible way to play Minecraft, would not recommend.
And you were saying you have RSI? I can't believe that.
Just shush you.
I also think the Z13 has weaned me off the track point because they got rid of the physical track point buttons, which
They
is
what?
fairly controversial. Yeah.
I've got a couple of ThinkPads now, and I never, ever use the track point.
Then you're using them wrong. You may as well just give them back.
Maybe I will.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to take your card. You're no longer allowed in the ThinkPad corner.
It does come back to, it's a very narrow highway that you travel on GNOME. And I think there is a little bit of tension between users and maintainers and developers because they do try and shape it out of what it is. And the big thing with that is extensions. So Dash to Dock is in Bluefin and Ubuntu. I think Fedora just does the wallpaper extension, but Ubuntu also has a tiling extension now. And the problem is it's a bit like if you installed exposed framework on a custom Android ROM going back. You're sort of poking about where you shouldn't, and you need to proceed at your own risk. And I think people get quite angry if there's a GNOME version bump and their extensions break, and then the maintainer of the extension has to refactor, or sometimes it's just not possible to bring it to the new version of GNOME.
Well, we're back to that conversation we had a couple of episodes ago about defaults and how you don't want to set other people up with anything other than defaults because stuff like this happens. And really, if you start really customizing GNOME, then you're just in for a world of pain, aren't you? I mean, Gary, you use some extensions. Have you had any problems with upgrades?
I've never had a problem with a GNOME upgrade, but those come around fairly infrequently. Like usually I'm doing a distro upgrade when I get a GNOME upgrade in Fedora or Ubuntu. But I have had weird behaviors with extensions conflicting and doing weird stuff like causing the mouse button to get stuck down. Stuff like that.
Wow.
So
Yep.
I've pared it down to just the bare essential extensions I feel I need to be productive.
Ah, the WordPress approach.
Pretty much, yes.
Remember when there was a bug in GNOME where it would freeze every second if you had the seconds on the clock because it had to update that part of the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a different time.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by 1Password. Imagine your company's security like the quad of a college campus. There are nice brick paths between the buildings. Those are company-owned devices, IT-approved apps, and managed employee identities. And then there are the paths people actually use, the shortcuts worn through the grass that are the actual straightest line from point A to B. Those are unmanaged devices, shadow IT apps, and non-employee identities like contractors. Most security tools only work on those happy brick paths, but a lot of security problems take place on the shortcuts. 1Password Extended Access Management is the first security solution that brings all these unmanaged devices, apps, and identities under your control. It ensures that every user credential is strong and protected, every device is known and healthy, and every app is visible. 1Password Extended Access Management solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. It's security for the way we work today, and it's now generally available to companies with Okta and Microsoft Entra, and in beta for Google Workspace customers. So support the show and check it out at onepassword.com/LinuxAfterDark. That's onepassword.com/LinuxAfterDark. Quick bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to linuxafterdark.net/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxafterdark.net.
I do think if you stick to GTK applications, then it is the closest I've come to Chrome OS. And the thing I like about Chrome OS is the consistency of the environment. Whereas in XFCE, I just accept, and it's because I throw applications from all over the place, like Flatpaks or DistroBox or from the repos. If it's a cute toolkit, things start to fall apart. But I do appreciate the attention to aesthetic detail that goes across the whole thing. I know that not everyone does. I think it's at libadwaita that can get people very hot under the collar, can't it?
Yeah, I especially like the giant bar at the top of every window. That's really good use of screen real estate.
Look, we've come a long way. You can actually get to it with the keyboard now, and that used to be impossible. So you couldn't get to the menu if you were just using the keyboard. We've come a long way.
Well, something that has come a long way is scaling. Now, I've been trying GNOME out on the MacBook Air M1, which I believe is a bit more than 1080p. And it just scales just perfectly without me doing anything. And I don't know how much of that is the Asahi devs and how much of it is GNOME, but I've generally found that no matter what screen I put it on, it just looks fine. I also put it on my old VivoBook, which is 1360 whatever by 768 or whatever. It's essentially 720p-ish, and that looks absolutely fine as well. And that consistency is not something you get with other desktops.
Well, you don't get it with GNOME if you've got mixed DPI displays, which I guess you didn't notice on the Mac because video out still doesn't work. But mixed display scale is still a big problem. But that's, I guess, more of a thing across all desktops than just a GNOME-specific thing.
Yeah, that's user error. You should not have mixed DPI displays.
Oh, you're holding it wrong.
You're just asking for trouble if you do that. Come on.
Tell that to my 4K laptop display plus my normal 1440p desktop screen.
I'm on his side here. I've got the framework laptop and two 1080p displays, and it's awful. So ultimately what I do is turn off the laptop's display, and I don't actually use GNOME's built-in scaling. I use large text mode because font scaling seems to work a little better than trying to do the actual scaling button in GNOME.
So Wayland's not a big win yet for that, because with X11, there's all sorts of xrandr bodges that you can do in that scenario. And I've read lots of people with very complicated dot files and bash wrapper scripts for when they log into a session under X11 to try and do that. Like literally things like setting the fractional scaling under and then setting the font DPI over and getting a balance and saving the dot files. But I was under the impression, because I don't have this scenario of mixed DPI displays. I thought Wayland was doing that better, but it doesn't necessarily sound like it does yet.
For GTK stuff, it's usually fine. It's when you get into like Electron apps that stuff doesn't behave right unless you do font scaling. And that's a bit of a bummer, but I'm sure we'll get over it eventually.
Yeah, anything Electron-based or anything using Chrome rendering is basically broken at this point, I think.
So I think this conversation also was sparked by, as you say, Joe, should you intricately set up a flavor, or, I'm running Debian XFCE. Would you give that to someone who asks, or would you give GNOME? And I said at the time, I probably wouldn't. But having done this now, there's a few little things I do. I don't like when you have a dock, I don't like it being present all the time. It feels like a huge waste of space. But I just changed a setting without an extension to make it intelligently hide. And I could see other people using this and being perfectly fine with it, especially if they've used a Chromebook before. You just say, this is the interface, here's some settings. There are very few settings, but your web browser loads, off you go, you're fine.
Yeah, and we talked about performance on that episode and how GNOME is heavy. And Gary, you said that you took a Chromebook away and it was too heavy with GNOME, so you put XFCE on it. Well, I tried with this old VivoBook. It's a 3rd gen i3 with 4 gigs of soldered RAM. And there really wasn't much in it between XFCE and GNOME, as far as I could see.
Yeah, to be fair, the machine I took away was a really old Bay Trail Chromebook, so it was really scraping the barrel in terms of what's usable. But my mum uses GNOME on Ubuntu 22.04 on a Wise 5070, and it's absolutely fine. No performance issues at all.
Yeah, my test laptop's a 2nd gen i3, which has 8 gigs of RAM. But as I say, when we looked at GNOME before, it was the same machine I used, and it felt a little bit clunky. You could feel the gears turning round, and those rough edges have been smoothed away. I do have some machines like Gary's mentioned there, and I probably would still choose. We mentioned Bunsen Labs before, or XFCE's Ubuntu, Debian XFCE on those, just because it does just take the rough edges and GNOME is just a little bit too much. But we also discussed recently that, like, certainly my stack has thinned out to 4 physical core machines or more now. Anything that I've got in the stack of laptops, I feel like it would run GNOME acceptably.
This is a really funny conversation to me as just a stealth GNOME user since like 2015. I've just always been using it, and I've never really, I've thought about it, and I've gone to KDE and stuff a couple of times, but just always went back to GNOME. I used Mate for a little while and Budgie for a little while, I guess, so, honorable mentions there. But I'd always go back to GNOME and have Dash to Dock and get my tray icons back, and I'm usually pretty happy. And I don't fuss a lot about computers past that point.
Is that why your FLAC icon looks different from everyone else's then?
No, that's because I'm uploading from Windows.
He's revealed the Scooby-Doo mask has been pulled off. There he is.
So are you really a GNOME user or are you a Windows user?
Both.
Which do you prefer? That's my question to you. There you go.
I prefer GNOME for any usable desktop experience, but I prefer Windows for being able to use the applications that I want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I had the choice of GNOME with all of the apps that I have on Windows, I would use GNOME.
I do think as well, friend of the show, George, there is some nice crossover happening there where I think there's a fairly harmonious blend of things that are happening, like Petixis, the GNOME terminal, which integrates with DistroBox, which is on Bluefin, is really nice. And I do appreciate the little touches. I think this is in GNOME as well. The notification you get if a background process in one of your terminal windows completes and gives an exit status. I actually really appreciate that. Regularly when I'm at work now, I have lots of terminals open and I forget a task because like I'll take a phone call or someone will wind me up or get a Slack message. And then I'll get to the end of the day when I'm shutting down the numerous things that are open and I'll think, God, I'm halfway through this. And then I have to make a note to myself to pick it up the next day. So to have a little toast pop up that says, thing you were doing is done, by the way, is actually very nice.
I've even noticed it going between my work machine on 2204 and whatever version ships with Fedora 40. And stuff like the control center is just way nicer now, where there's a single button to click to turn on my VPN, or a single click to view available Wi-Fi networks or change sound device. Things like that didn't exist a couple of years ago are just there now, and just really nice quality of life improvements, I think, are coming down the pipe at this point.
And some of those things are things that have come from extensions. I actually don't know. Does the drop-down Bluetooth and Wi-Fi menu, do those exist in stock, or is that an extension?
I think those are extensions in the older versions, but they exist in stock now.
Okay. Those are features that are really nice. There's definitely a lot of work going into the control center that I appreciate.
Yeah, I had an extension on my work machine to change audio device between the Focusrite that I use for recording and the internal mic on the laptop, whereas now that's just there. And when a mic's plugged in, I can choose which mic to use. It's really nice.
Yeah, and the keyboard backlight control is right there as well in the drop-down.
Yeah, all this stuff is really coming thick and fast now, I think, and it's just getting much nicer to use. I'm really looking forward to an image being available for 2404 for my work machine so I can get some of the improvements that I kind of use every day on my personal laptop.
I think I could see myself using it, but I'm not going to yet. And because I went back and was able to have another play with George's setup, and unfortunately they had a certificate bug or something, so I had to iron that out. But I still have my head turned regularly by that, being able to switch desktop environments. I feel like with XFC on Debian, it's perfect because it's not changing in the desktop environment or the distribution. But if I did decide to run GNOME or Plasma or anything like that, where there's much more churn of features and improvements, that's where I would want to be, rather than on Debian waiting 2 years to jump a number of releases potentially.
I feel like as I get older and less patient and less willing to put up with bullshit, I could see myself eventually moving to GNOME. Just when I start to need Wayland, like I need Wayland on the MacBook, for example. And so my only choices are GNOME and KDE, and I have chosen GNOME, seemingly. I don't need Wayland for the rest of my hardware yet, but I feel like at some point, stuff is just going to stop working in X11. And I'm going to have to make that switch. And I get the feeling that XFCE won't be quite ready by then. And so I'm going to have to move. And so what do I move to? I might just say, let's go stock. Let's just install Ubuntu and just bite the bullet.
You heard it here first, guys. We convinced Jay.
We did it.
There is excitement coming as well. Just this week, I was watching a video that they're adding Android game compatibility to Steam. Now, that may or may not be something that you're interested in, but of course the backend for that is Waydroid. And why is it called Waydroid? Because it relies on Wayland. And there will be other applications that aren't just about gaming where this stuff is going to start to mature. And I love XFCE to death. It's snappy. I'm really, really happy with it, but there's just not the development going into it. We have to be realistic. It's not a criticism of the project, but it has a Wayland roadmap. It will probably get there in the end, but it's just a different proposition.
Right. Well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been Dalton.
See you later.